betrayed, broken, reborn. Damian Ravenshade was once a celebrated adventurer, a man who fought for honor, love, and glory. But when the woman he cherished casts him aside for power and status, he learns a brutal truth. Loyalty means nothing in a world ruled by ambition. Left to pick up the shattered pieces of his past, Damian embarks on a journey not for revenge, but for himself. He decides to carve his name into legend. This is a tale of betrayal, redemption, and the rise of a warrior who refuses to be forgotten. Let's join Damian on his journey to reclaim his destiny. Chapter 1: The Adventurer's Heart. The cold wind roared through the towering pines of the Frostvale wilderness, biting at Damian's exposed skin as he crouched low against a rocky outcrop. His breath came out in misty puffs, but his grip remained steady on the hilt of his sword. Below him, a hulking frostfanged direwolf stalked the clearing, sniffing the air. Another contract, another hunt, another step toward fame. Damian wasn't just another adventurer, he was one of the finest to emerge from Whispershade in the last decade. He lived for the thrill of battle, the unknown dangers lurking in the depths of dungeons, and the rush of triumph when he stood victorious over a slain beast. Gold and glory fueled his pursuits, but beyond that, he sought something else, something he had yet to name. With a flick of his wrist, Damian sent a dagger flying. It struck true, embedding itself into the beast's thick hide. The direwolf snarled and charged, but Damian was already moving. He sidestepped with fluid grace, drawing his longsword in a single swift motion. The battle was fierce but brief, ending with Damian standing victorious over the corpse of his prey. Blood painted his armor, but he only grinned, wiping his blade clean. The bounty would pay well. The name Damian Ravenshade would spread further, and yet, despite his success, a hollow feeling nestled deep within his chest. Was fame and gold truly all he sought? A week later, Whispershade buzzed with life as nobles and commoners alike prepared for the Grand Equinox Banquet, an annual gathering where merchants, adventurers, and the aristocracy mingled beneath the glow of enchanted chandeliers. Damian rarely attended such lavish affairs, preferring the solitude of the wilds over the stifling air of nobility. But this year was different. He had been invited. It wasn't out of courtesy. Damian had earned his place at the banquet through his countless victories. Slaying a basilisk in the Duskwood ruins, felling an entire bandit camp single-handedly, retrieving a lost relic for the Temple of Lyora. His feats had captured the attention of nobles and guild leaders alike, and now, he found himself standing at the entrance of the Silver Hall estate, clad in an unfamiliar aristocrat's tunic instead of his usual leather armor. The hall was grand, gold-trimmed pillars, velvet-draped tables, and crystalline chandeliers that bathed the room in soft light. Exotic foods graced silver platters, the scent of honeyed venison and spiced wine filling the air. But none of it captured his attention quite like the woman standing at the center of it all. Selena Valamut. She was breathtaking, long auburn hair cascading over bare shoulders, emerald green eyes reflecting the candlelight, and a poise that spoke of refined elegance. Dressed in a flowing sapphire gown, she held the air of nobility with effortless grace. Yet it wasn't just her beauty that enraptured Damian. It was the way she carried herself, with confidence, intelligence, and a spark of mischief that set her apart from the other aristocrats. "Hey," the infamous adventurer himself, a voice called. Damian turned to find Lord Auric Valamut, the host of the banquet and Selena's father, gesturing for him to approach. "Slayer of beasts and conqueror of dungeons, come, let me introduce you to my daughter." Damian approached with measured steps, his usual confidence wavering under Selena's piercing gaze. She looked at him not with the awe of a noblewoman impressed by a warrior's strength, but with curiosity. "So," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "you're the adventurer who's making a name for himself?" Damian smirked, inclining his head. "I suppose I am. And you must be the jewel of Whispershade." Selena chuckled, a genuine sound that made his heart lurch unexpectedly. "Flattery already. You're as bold as the rumors say." Lord Auric laughed heartily before stepping away, allowing them to talk freely. They spoke for hours. Damian, for the first time in years, found himself drawn into conversation that wasn't about monsters, quests, or gold. Selena spoke of literature, of philosophy, of the burdens and expectations of nobility. In turn, he told her about the world beyond the castle walls, the thrill of battle, the friendships forged in fire, the loneliness of an adventurer's life. She listened, truly listened, with a fascinated gleam in her eyes. By the end of the night, Damian had fallen, not in battle, not in defeat, but in love. The days that followed were filled with whispered conversations in moonlit gardens, stolen glances across crowded ballrooms, and midnight meetings where Damian spun tales of his adventures, each one earning a smile from Selena. She made him feel like more than just an adventurer, more than a sword for hire, more than a name. For her, he wanted to be more. He took on more perilous quests, not just for gold, but to impress her, to provide for her, to prove his worth in a world where bloodlines mattered more than bravery. He returned from each journey bearing gifts, rare gems, enchanted roses from the Evershadow glade, silk from the eastern kingdoms. And every time he returned, she was there, waiting, smiling, touching his arm in that way that made his pulse quicken. He wanted to believe it was love, that she saw him as he saw her, that she too had fallen. Yet, deep inside, a whisper of doubt stirred. Selena never promised him anything. She never voiced her feelings outright. She accepted his gifts, enjoyed his company, but had she ever truly chosen him? He ignored the doubt. He pushed it down, believing that one day she would say it. One day, she would tell him that he was the one she wanted. And so, he fought harder. He rose in fame, in fortune, in power, all for her. Never once realizing he was standing at the edge of a precipice, blind to the fall that awaited him. A fall that would shatter him in ways no blade ever could. Chapter 2, Love and Sacrifice. Damian had always been a man of purpose, his blade driven by ambition and the thrill of the hunt. Yet, as the days passed, his purpose became singular, Selena. It started subtly. He would return from his quests and visit her at the Valmont estate, bringing her rare trinkets from his travels. An enchanted sapphire necklace, retrieved from the depths of the obsidian catacombs, its gem shimmering with an eternal glow. A firebird feather, acquired after he had ventured to the Cinder Peaks, facing fire elementals and scorching winds. Each item was given with the same intention: to see her eyes light up with admiration, to hear the soft gratitude in her voice, to make her smile. Selena never explicitly asked him for these gifts, but her delighted expressions and playful teasing always encouraged him to do more. "You spoil me, Damian," she had said one evening as she ran her fingers over the sapphire's smooth surface. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you were trying to win my heart." He had chuckled, masking the vulnerability in his voice. Would that be such a terrible thing? She had only smiled, a coy, indistinct smile, before turning the conversation elsewhere. It was always like that, never a rejection, never a promise, just enough warmth to keep him hoping. The quests grew more perilous. Damian's name became one whispered in every guild hall and marketplace. He took on jobs others would shy away from, delving into the abyssal caverns, where a single misstep meant death in an endless void, hunting the Shadow Stalker, a beast said to be unkillable, its body fading into mist whenever a blade came close. He returned victorious from each challenge, bloodied but undefeated. Yet, despite his rising fame, his mind was always on her. With every battle won, every gold piece earned, his first thought was of what he could bring back for Selena. He poured his wealth into rare fabrics, jewelry, and invitations to private performances. She attended them, always graceful and appreciative, her eyes gleaming when he told her of his triumphs. Another monster slain, she would muse, sipping wine at one of the many extravagant gatherings she frequented. "You truly are unstoppable." Her words fed his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for adventure anymore, he was fighting for her. But with devotion came doubt. Did she truly care for him as he cared for her? There were nights when he would lie awake in the small estate he had purchased in Whisper Shade, staring at the ceiling, replaying their interactions. She had never given him false promises, but she had also never declared her heart. Damian reassured himself that love was not always spoken. It was felt, nurtured, proven. And so, he fought harder, dug deeper, traveled farther. One particular quest nearly ended him. A noble had requested the retrieval of a moonstone chalice, said to be hidden within the ruins of Veldrith Keep, a fortress swallowed by time, its halls patrolled by spirits and wraiths unwilling to rest. The air had been thick with whispers of the damned, and every step within the keep felt as though unseen eyes bored into his soul. The wraiths were relentless, striking with phantom blades that bypassed armor and cut at his very essence. He barely made it out alive, his body racked with exhaustion, his soul drained from the prolonged battle. But he succeeded. The chalice, a relic of ancient kings, infused with celestial magic, was brought back. And when he presented it to Selena, Her eyes widened in admiration. "This is magnificent," she murmured, tracing the inscriptions along the rim. "You truly are remarkable, Damian." Those words, that look, it made every pain, every wound worth it. The world took notice of him. Bards sang of Damian Ravenshade, the fearless warrior, the adventurer who challenged the impossible and emerged victorious. Lords and merchants sought his aid. He was no longer just an adventurer, he was a legend in the making. Yet, his heart remained with one person. She was there at the celebratory banquets held in his honor, always dressed in the finest silks, always watching him with a knowing smile. She never refused his invitations, never turned him away when he visited her estate. And each time, he told himself that this was progress, that one day she would speak the words he longed to hear. Yet, some nights, when he would arrive unannounced, he would find her entertaining other suitors. Noblemen, aristocrats, men who belonged in her world in ways he did not. Still, he endured harder, sacrificed more, and every time she smiled and said, "You always amaze me, Damian." But was admiration the same as love? There was one evening under the silver glow of the moon where he dared to ask, "What is it you truly want, Selina?" She had tilted her head, watching him as if searching for something in his expression. For a moment he thought she might finally say it, might finally tell him that his devotion had not been in vain. But she only sighed, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "You know how complicated things are, Damian. You know that my world is not the same as yours." His hands clenched at his sides. "I would give you the world if you asked for it." She had smiled then, soft but distant, as though he were something precious yet unattainable. "I know," she whispered, and then she had kissed him, a soft, fleeting thing, one that left him breathless and hoping, yet also aching with uncertainty. As she walked away, disappearing into the halls of her estate, Damian stood there, alone under the night sky, his heart swelling with love, yet weighed by doubt. He had given her everything, and he would give more if only to keep that hope alive, for hope was a powerful thing. And love was worth any sacrifice. Chapter 3. The Betrayal. The night air was crisp as Damian made his way through the familiar streets of Whispershade, the faint glow of lanterns illuminating the cobblestone paths. The thrill of his latest victory still coursed through his veins, a mission that had nearly claimed his life. Deep within the ruins of the Frostfang tundra, he had fought off an ice worm, retrieving a relic lost to time. The battle had left him scarred, wary, but victorious. And through it all, one thought had kept him going: Selina. He carried with him a gift, a crystal rose, crafted from enchanted ice that never melted, its petals shimmering with a soft blue glow. It was said to be a symbol of eternal devotion. Damian had risked everything to claim it, eager to present it to her. But when he reached Valamon Estate, the sight that met him stole the air from his lungs. Selina was in another man's arms. She leaned into Jason Ravenshade, a noble of high standing, her laughter soft and melodic as she gazed up at him. Jason's arm was wrapped possessively around her waist, his expression smug and victorious. They stood on the grand balcony overlooking the estate's gardens, oblivious to Damian's presence below. His heart thundered in his chest. The crystal rose slipped from his grasp, shattering into glittering shards upon the ground. For a moment, Damian told himself there had to be a mistake. Perhaps this was some grand misunderstanding. Perhaps Selina had been forced into this arrangement, her noble obligations outweighing her true feelings. He had to hear it from her, had to know why. He stepped forward, but just as he did, Jason's voice carried across the night air, laced with amusement and arrogance. "Your little adventurer." Jason mused, his fingers brushing against the strands of Selina's hair. How quaint. He was useful for a time, I suppose. Selina sighed, tilting her head slightly. He was persistent, a bit reckless, always throwing himself into danger for my sake. Damian froze, his breath caught in his throat. Jason chuckled. Pathetic, really. Did he think you'd actually lower yourself to be with someone like him? A man who wallows in blood and dirt, a common sellsword-playing hero. Selina said nothing for a long moment. Damian held his breath, waiting, praying for her to defend him. But instead, she only laughed softly. It was amusing while it lasted. Damian staggered back as if he had been physically struck. He had risked his life countless times, ventured into the most dangerous places, slain creatures that haunted the nightmares of men, all for her. And yet, to her, he was nothing more than an amusement. The realization cut deeper than any blade ever could. The days that followed were a living hell. Selena and Jason became inseparable. The aristocrat flaunted their relationship at every opportunity, parading her through lavish banquets and moonlit strolls as if she were a trophy. And worst of all, she let him. Damian watched from the sidelines as the woman he had once cherished pretended he did not exist. Banquets that he had once attended with her, she now attended with Jason. When their paths crossed in the grand halls of Whispershade, she barely acknowledged him. The first time he approached her after that night, her response was as cold as the tundra he had barely escaped from. "Selena," he had said, his voice strained with the weight of betrayal. "I need to understand why." She had turned, her green eyes impassive. "Damian," she said smoothly, as if speaking to a stranger. "Please, let's not make a scene." He felt as if the ground had vanished beneath him. Jason, standing beside her, smirked. "I think it's rather sad, don't you?" he mused, his tone mocking. A man who doesn't understand his place. Damian's fists clenched, his blood roaring in his ears. His place. After everything he had done, after everything he had endured, he was now beneath them. Selena placed a delicate hand on Jason's arm and simply said, "Come, Jason, we shouldn't waste our time." And with that, she walked away, leaving Damian standing alone. It didn't stop there. Jason took every opportunity to humiliate him. Whenever Damian entered a room, Jason would smirk and whisper, his voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Ah, the former suitor. Poor man, still clinging to a dream. Selena never corrected him. At one particularly grand feast, where nobles and adventurers alike gathered, Jason approached him outright, a goblet of wine in one hand, a cruel glint in his eyes. "Tell me, Damian," he said, his voice oozing condescension. "What's it like to be nothing more than a passing entertainment for someone of true worth?" Damian remained silent, though every fiber of his being screamed for him to strike. Jason continued, swirling his wine lazily. "I'll give you credit, you played the part of the devoted fool remarkably well." He chuckled. "But Selena deserves a man of stature, not some sword-wielding brute who reeks of battlefields." A few nobles around them laughed softly, entertained by Jason's jabs. Damian exhaled slowly, keeping his rage contained. He had fought dragons, outwitted demons, and survived the abyss. Yet nothing had ever wounded him quite like this. He met Jason's gaze, his own like hardened steel. "One day," Damian said quietly, voice steady but brimming with an unshakable resolve, "you'll realize that your titles and wealth mean nothing when you stand before true strength." Jason smirked, raising his goblet. "How poetic. Do let me know when that day comes, won't you?" The nobles laughed again, and Selena said nothing. Damian turned on his heel and walked away, but as he left, he made a vow. This was not the end, not for him. That night, he stood on the cliffs overlooking the city, the wind roaring around him. His love had been one-sided, his sacrifices meaningless. He had given everything to Selena, but she had only ever seen him as a means to an end. No more. As the moon cast its silver glow over Whispershade, Damian let the past die. He would rise not for love, not for approval, but for himself, and one day they would all know his name. Chapter 4, Rising from the Ashes. The world had turned its back on him. At least, that was how Damian felt as he wandered aimlessly through the streets of Whispershade. The vibrant town, once full of warmth and excitement, now seemed dull and lifeless in his eyes. He had given everything for Selena, his time, his devotion, his very blood, and in the end, she had discarded him like he was nothing more than a passing thought. A heavy rain fell over the town, mirroring the turmoil in his heart. His cloak was soaked through, but he didn't care. The pain in his chest was far worse than any chill the rain could bring. With nowhere else to go, he found himself at the Adventurer's Guild, the place that had once been his true home before he allowed love to cloud his judgment. As he stepped inside, the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth did little to ease the coldness in his soul. He was met with whispers and glances from other adventurers, some mocking, some pitying. Damian ignored them all, making his way to a corner table where he could drown himself in solitude. "You look like hell," a voice interrupted his thoughts. Damian looked up to see a woman standing before him. She had very long, platinum hair, piercing blue eyes, and an air of confidence that made it clear she wasn't one to be trifled with. It was Jasmine, a well-known adventurer who had built a name for herself by completing impossible quests with sheer determination and skill. "Leave me alone," Damian muttered, not in the mood for conversation. Jasmine, however, pulled up a chair and sat across from him. "No can do. I've been watching you for a while, Damian. You're stronger than this. And frankly, I'm not going to sit here and watch you waste your potential over some noblewoman who doesn't deserve you." Her bluntness caught him off guard, and for the first time in days, he felt something other than despair. "You don't understand," he started, but she cut him off with a wave of her hand. "Oh, I understand just fine," she said, leaning forward. "I know exactly what it's like to be discarded, to be treated as if your worth is measured by how much you can give to someone else. But you're not just some lovesick fool, Damian. You're one of the best adventurers this guild has seen. And if you think I'm going to let you throw that away, you're dead wrong." Her words struck a chord in him, awakening something that had been buried beneath his pain. He had spent so long chasing after Selena's approval that he had forgotten what truly mattered: his own journey, his own strength. Jasmine smirked as she saw the fire return to his eyes. "That's more like it," she said. "Now, get up. We've got work to do." And just like that, Damian found himself pulled back into the whirl of adventure. But this time, he wasn't doing it for anyone else. He was doing it for himself. Their first quest together was an S-rank mission to hunt down a wyvern that had been terrorizing a nearby village. The creature was known for its cunning and deadly venom, making it a challenge even for the most seasoned adventurers. Standing at the edge of the cliffside where the wyvern was last spotted, Damian felt the familiar rush of adrenaline course through his veins. He had missed this feeling, the thrill of the hunt, the satisfaction of overcoming impossible odds. "All right," Jasmine said, drawing her twin daggers. "I'll distract it while you finish it off." But Damian nodded, gripping the hilt of his sword tightly. As soon as the wyvern came into view, Jasmine moved like lightning, darting between the creature's attacks with agility that left Damian in awe. She wasn't just strong, she was brilliant in battle. Taking advantage of the opening she created, Damian leapt forward, his blade slicing through the wyvern's wing. The beast roared in pain, its venomous fangs snapping dangerously close to him. But he didn't waver. With one final strike, he drove his sword into the wyvern's heart, ending its reign of terror. As the villagers celebrated their victory, Damian turned to Jasmine, breathing heavily. "That was incredible," he admitted. She grinned. "Told you, we make a good team." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Damian smiled. Their partnership only grew stronger from there. They took on quest after quest, slaying monsters that others deemed unbeatable, uncovering ancient ruins, and retrieving lost treasures. With each battle, Damian's confidence returned, his skills sharpened, and his reputation soared. But it wasn't just his strength that grew, it was his bond with Jasmine. She had been the one to pull him from the depths of despair, and in return, he had found someone who truly understood him. They fought side by side, blood together, and celebrated their victories as equals. One evening, after a particularly grueling battle against a horde of undead, they sat by the campfire, the warmth of the flames warding off the night's chill. "You've changed," Jasmine noted, poking at the fire with a stick. Damian raised an eyebrow. Oh, she nodded. "You're stronger not just physically, but mentally. You don't need someone else's approval to know your worth anymore." He stared at the flames, contemplating her words. She was right. He had spent so long trying to prove himself to Selena that he had forgotten to value himself. But with Jasmine, things were different. She didn't expect him to be anything other than who he was, and that was more than enough. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "For everything." Jasmine smirked. "Don't get all sentimental on me now," she teased, but there was warmth in her eyes. "We've still got a long way to go." And as Damian looked up at the stars, he realized that for the first time in a long time, he was exactly where he was meant to be. Chapter 5: Jason's Scheme. The sun had barely begun its descent when Damian and Jasmine returned from yet another victorious hunt, their names echoing in the whispers of the city. What had once been whispered mockery about a discarded adventurer had transformed into admiration and awe. Damian had risen from the ashes of betrayal, proving his worth through action, not words. His reputation as an elite adventurer now contested nobles in influence, drawing the envy of those who once scorned him. Among those watching was Jason, his face contorted in irritation every time he heard the name Damian. It grated against him like a dull knife. How could a low-born adventurer surpass him in prestige? Worse yet, Selena's attention was shifting. She had once treated Damian as an afterthought, but now she couldn't ignore his growing influence. Jason noticed how her gaze lingered a moment too long whenever someone spoke of Damian's latest achievements. Jason clenched his fists. He needed to act before Damian became an obstacle too large to remove. Jason had never loved Selena. She was merely a means to an end, a stepping stone to elevate his family's status. The moment he had secured his engagement to her, doors had opened for him, lucrative deals, political alliances, and access to the nobility's inner circle. But Damian's rise threatened everything. If Selena lost interest in him, her family might reconsider the engagement, undoing all his efforts. This could not be allowed. Jason reached out to the less reputable figures within the city, rogues and mercenaries willing to trade morality for coin. The plan was simple: orchestrate an accident during one of Damian's hunts. A well-placed arrow in the wilderness, an impaired bridge, or an ambush by monsters. Anything that would ensure Damian never returned. The first attempt failed. The rogue Jason hired had underestimated Damian's battle instincts and met his demise instead. The second plan, a poisoned blade from an anonymous assassin, also failed when Jasmine detected the toxin before Damian could be harmed. Each failure fueled Jason's desperation. Damian was no fool. He had noticed the string of incidents, and Jasmine had been the first to voice her suspicions. "These aren't coincidences, Damian," she said, her sapphire eyes filled with concern. "Someone wants you dead." "I know," he admitted, sharpening his sword. "And I think I know who." Jason was arrogant but not discreet. Every failure made him more reckless, and Damian had caught glimpses of his growing frustration. It wasn't difficult to connect the dots, but Damian refused to act without proof. "We need to expose him," Jasmine said. "If we can find evidence of his schemes, we can bring him down legally." Damian nodded, but in his heart, he knew Jason wouldn't stop until he was dead. This wasn't just about reputation anymore. This was survival. Selena, oblivious to Jason's plans, had begun to feel the weight of her choices. Jason was not the man she had believed him to be. He was dismissive, often speaking of their future as if she were nothing more than an accessory. His attention lay not with her, but with the power her family name granted him. It was then that she started watching Damian again. She had once thought him reckless, blindly throwing himself into danger for her sake. But now, she saw the man he had become, stronger, wiser, respected, and Jasmine was always by his side. It should have been her. Her heart clenched as she overheard Jason arguing with a shady figure in the shadows of an alleyway. Words of assassination, failed attempts, and another planned ambush reached her ears. Her blood ran cold. Jason was trying to get rid of Damian. Realization hit her like a storm. Jason was nothing without her family name. And if he could plot against Damian, what would stop him from turning on her when she was no longer useful? For the first time since she had abandoned Damian, she felt fear. Jasmine worked swiftly, using her network of informants to trace Jason's dealings. It was only a matter of time before they found what they needed: ledgers, correspondence, and testimony from an injured mercenary who had barely survived one of Jason's failed plans. The evidence was irrefutable. The confrontation came in the heart of the city, during a grand banquet hosted by Selena's family. It was a gathering of nobles, adventurers, and merchants, an event where reputation meant everything. Damian and Jasmine entered with purpose. The hall quieted as they strode toward Jason. "Jason," Damian called, his voice carrying through the grand hall. "You've been busy." Jason turned, pretending to be indifferent. "The famed adventurer, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Jasmine stepped forward, her expression indistinct. "We have proof, Jason. Proof of your attempts to have Damian assassinated. Proof that you never cared for Selena, only her family name." Murmurs spread through the hall like wildfire. Nobles exchanged glances, scandal buzzing in the air. Jason's face paled. "Lays," he spat. "You think anyone will believe a pair of adventurers over a noble? We already gave the evidence to the city authorities," Damian said calmly. "These should be arriving any moment now." As if on cue, armored guards entered the hall. The lead officer held up a parchment bearing the royal seal. "Jason of House Duval, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and numerous other crimes. Your noble status is revoked effective immediately." Panic flashed across Jason's face. "You can't do this. I'm a noble." "Not anymore," the officer said. Jason tried to run, but the guards were faster. Within moments, he was subdued and dragged away, his screams fading as he disappeared from sight. Selena stood frozen, eyes darting between Damian and the space where Jason had been. For the first time, true regret flooded her features. She stepped forward, her voice uncertain. "Damian, I had no idea. Save it." Damian interrupted, his tone devoid of warmth. "I don't care anymore." Selena flinched, her hands trembling. "Please, I made a mistake. I see that. Now. I don't want to lose you completely." Damian studied her for a long moment before shaking his head. "You lost me a long time ago." He turned away, Jasmine at his side. Together, they walked out of the grand hall, leaving the past behind. Selena stood in the silence of her shattered world, watching him go. She would move on, she had no choice. But she would always wonder what could have been. Meanwhile, Damian and Jasmine continued forward, their adventures far from over. Chapter 6: Justice Served. The city of Whispershade was abuzz with whispers of scandal and deceit. The name Jason, once spoken with respect among the noble circles, now carried an air of disgrace. Damian and Jasmine had spent weeks gathering irrefutable evidence against him, navigating through a web of deceit, bribery, and betrayal. Now, they stood at the precipice of their long-fought battle, ready to bring Jason to justice. With meticulous precision, Jasmine had infiltrated key networks, bribed informants, and uncovered documents that detailed Jason's corruption. He had siphoned funds from noble families, plotted assassinations, and used Selena's family's influence as a stepping stone for his own ambitions. The evidence was damning, and the day of reckoning had come. The courtroom was grand, adorned with golden chandeliers and towering pillars. Nobles, merchants, and commoners alike filled the seats, their gazes fixed on the accused. Jason stood at the center, his once pristine noble attire wrinkled and his usual smug demeanor replaced with barely concealed panic. The judge, an elder man of stern countenance, eyed the room before gesturing for the prosecution to speak. Damian stepped forward, his voice steady and unwavering. "My lord, we present undeniable proof that Jason has manipulated noble standings, engaged in criminal acts, and even conspired against fellow adventurers for his personal gain. The evidence is here before you," Damian said, unfurling several scrolls onto the table. "Signed contracts, financial records, and testimonies from trusted individuals all point to his deceit." Jasmine stood beside him, her sharp eyes scanning Jason's every reaction. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as the court murmured in response to Damian's words. The proof was overwhelming. Then, Selena was called to the stand. Clad in elegant yet subdued attire, she stepped forward, her once radiant confidence now dimmed. She had been summoned as both a witness and a victim of Jason's deceit. "Lady Selena, did you willingly partake in any of these acts?" the judge asked, his gaze piercing. Selena hesitated. She had been blind to Jason's true nature, too swept up in the illusion of power and prestige to see the damage she had inflicted upon Damian and herself. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "No, I was deceived. I believed Jason truly cared for me, but I see now that I was nothing more than a pawn in his scheme." Jason scoffed from his place. "You were more than willing, Selena," he sneered. "Don't act so innocent now that everything is falling apart." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Selena flinched, but she did not respond. She had already lost everything, her reputation, her dignity, and the one person who had ever truly loved her. The judge raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "The evidence is clear. Jason, you are found guilty of conspiracy, corruption, and attempted murder. You are hereby stripped of your nobility and sentenced to life imprisonment." The courtroom erupted into murmurs as guards seized Jason, shackling his wrists. He thrashed, his eyes wild with rage. "You'll regret this, Damian," he spat, his voice venomous. "You think this makes you better than me? You're nothing but a filthy adventurer." Damian met his glare with calm resolve. "And yet, it's you who will rot in a cell," he said simply. With that, Jason was dragged away, his cries of indignation fading into the distance. Justice had been served. As the crowd dispersed, Selena remained seated, staring at the floor. She had been blind, foolish, and now she was left with nothing. When she finally gathered the courage to approach Damian, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry," she said, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I didn't see it before, but now I know. You were the one who truly cared. I was a fool to betray you." Damian regarded her with quiet contemplation. He felt no anger toward her anymore, only a distant sense of loss. "It doesn't matter anymore, Selena," he said. "I've moved on." Selena's lips trembled. "Can we at least be friends?" she asked hopefully. Damian sighed, Glancing toward Jasmine, who was waiting for him near the doors, he shook his head. "No, I've learned my lesson. Goodbye, Selena." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the grand hall. She watched as he and Jasmine exited together, side by side, stepping into a future unburdened by the past. Though her heart pained, she knew she had no one to blame but herself. Selena would try to move on, but deep down, she knew she would always keep an eye on Damian from afar, hoping he found the happiness she had thrown away. Chapter 7. The Final Decision. The echoes of Jason's downfall had faded, but the remnants of his schemes still lingered in the minds of Whispershade's citizens. With justice served, Damian and Jasmine had quickly resumed their lives as adventurers, taking on greater challenges and forging their own path forward. Their names had become legendary, their feats spoken of in awe across the kingdom. Yet, even with his rising fame, there was one matter Damian had yet to truly face: Selena's apology. It was a quiet evening when Selena finally gathered the courage to approach him. She found him at the city's main plaza, sitting on a bench beside Jasmine. The two were engaged in a quiet conversation, Jasmine's laughter ringing softly in the night air. Selena hesitated, her heart pounding, but she stepped forward nonetheless. "Damian," she called hesitantly. He turned, his expression neutral. There was no bitterness in his gaze, but neither was there warmth. It was a far cry from the admiration and devotion he had once held for her. Jasmine glanced at him, then at Selena, before standing. "I'll give you two a moment," she murmured before walking away. Selena took a deep breath. "I wanted to speak with you. I owe you an apology, a real one." Damian remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I was selfish," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I let myself be blinded by status and wealth, and I betrayed the only person who truly cared for me. I see that now. I should have appreciated you when I had the chance, and She paused, trying to keep her composure. "I regret everything." Damian sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Selena, I won't say your words mean nothing, because I know they do. But I've moved on. That chapter of my life is over." Tears welled in her eyes. "Can we at least try to rebuild our friendship?" He shook his head. "No. It's not just about what you did, Selena. It's about who I've become. I'm not the same man who once worshipped you. I've changed, and I won't go back." Selena swallowed hard, nodding despite the pain in her chest. "I understand." She had known deep down that this was the answer she would receive, but hearing it aloud made it real. She had lost him, not just as a lover, but as a person in her life entirely. Damian stood, his gaze soft but resolute. "Take care of yourself, Selena." With that, he walked away, rejoining Jasmine, who had been waiting at the plaza's fountain. The two exchanged a look before Jasmine grinned and nudged him playfully. Whatever she said made Damian chuckle, and they continued on, side by side. Selena watched them go, a hollow feeling settling in her chest. She had once been the one Damian would do anything for, the one he had adored beyond reason. Now, she was just a memory of his past, a painful lesson he had outgrown. Over the following months, she tried to move on. She immersed herself in noble affairs, attended social gatherings, and even traveled to distant lands. But no matter where she went, a part of her always checked for news of Damian. Every time she heard of his latest achievements, of the monsters he and Jasmine had slain, of the impossible quests they had completed, she felt a pang of regret. She had let go of a man who had been willing to give her the world, and now he was walking a path she could never follow. As time passed, she came to accept that some mistakes could never be undone. Damian had chosen his future, and it no longer included her. And so, with a heavy heart, Selena let him go, truly this time. Chapter 8. Moving forward. The road stretched endlessly before them, winding through vast green fields and shadowy forests, a path of adventure and discovery. Damian and Jasmine walked side by side, their weapons strapped to their backs, their spirits light despite the challenges they faced. Each step forward was another tale waiting to be told, another trial to overcome, and they welcomed it. Their journey had taken them through lands both familiar and unknown, from the frigid peaks of the Frostvale Mountains to the scorching dunes of the Emberlands. Together, they had hunted mythical beasts, uncovered lost ruins, and defended helpless villages from monstrous threats. Their names were no longer just whispered in admiration, but spoken with reverence. Damian had once fought for the affection of a woman who never truly saw him. Now, he fought for himself and for the world that needed him. and with Jasmine at his side, he had never felt stronger. "Look at this," Jasmine said, holding up a glowing gemstone retrieved from the remains of a vanquished wyvern. "Ever seen something like this before?" Damian smirked, shaking his head. "Not once. But knowing you probably already have a dozen theories about what it does." She grinned. "Of course. A gemstone this rare must have some unique magical properties. We should take it to a mage and have it appraised." He chuckled, shaking his head in amusement. "You and your insatiable curiosity. And you and your never-ending need to slay things twice your size." She shot back playfully. Their banter was effortless, their camaraderie built on trust forged through battle and hardship. It was a bond neither of them had expected, but one that had become unbreakable. They had become equals, partners in adventure and in life. Meanwhile, in the noble district of Whispershade, Selena sat on the balcony of her family's estate, gazing out over the city she once ruled in status and prestige. The night air was cool, the stars glimmering above like distant dreams she could never reach. A year had passed since Damian had turned his back on her, and though she had tried to move on, she found herself drawn to the stories of his exploits. At every banquet, every gathering, she heard his name. Not as the lovesick adventurer who once did everything for her, but as the man who had carved his own legend. Every time she heard of him and Jasmine, a sharp pang of regret twisted in her chest. Had she truly lost him forever? She had come to accept that she had no place in his life now, but it didn't stop her from wondering. Was he happy? Did he ever think of her, even for a moment? Would he ever forgive her completely? A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Her younger sister stepped inside, concern flickering in her eyes. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" Selena sighed. "It's hard not to. He's everywhere, his name, his deeds. It's as if the entire kingdom is celebrating the man I once had and threw away." Her sister sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on hers. "You can't change the past, Selena. You can only learn from it." "I know," Selena murmured. "I just wish I had realized what I had before it was too late." Outside the city, Damian and Jasmine made camp beneath the open sky. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows as they sat across from one another, discussing their next journey. "I heard there's a dungeon hidden beneath the ruins of Eldoria," Jasmine said. "Rumors say no one who has entered has ever returned." Damian raised a brow. "Sounds like a challenge." She smirked. "I thought you'd say that." He leaned back, gazing up at the sky. "Do you ever think about the past?" Jasmine was silent for a moment before answering. "I used to, but I've learned that dwelling on what was only holds you back from what could be." Damian nodded. He had spent so long chasing a love that had never truly been his, blind to his own worth. Now, he saw his life for what it was, his own, and he was ready to embrace it. As they drifted into a peaceful sleep beneath the stars, Selena sat awake in her chamber, staring at the same sky, contemplating the life she had lost. Some paths, once diverged, could never be crossed again, and for the first time she accepted that Damian's path no longer led back to her. It was time to move forward. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps bring more adventures to life, and I'd love to have you on this journey. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter.